Okay, hopefully this is the final video, fourth and final video about the phone calls, the recorded phone calls between Scott Peterson and Amber Frey. We are up to February 10th. I mentioned that we started at 8:55 in the morning. Scott calls her 3 times that day. And it's mostly, this is her birthday. This is Amber's birthday, but it's also the same day that Lacey was supposed to deliver Connor. So he calls her. Now, he does mention that he's calling her from a payphone. So I think at this point, he's just trying to allude. He's, obviously he knows now she's done a press conference. So he's got to know there's wiretaps. He's got to know all this is going on. But he calls her from a payphone and talks to her. It's kind of very bittersweet that he's calling on her birthday. On February 13th, he calls again. And this is also 8 pages of transcript, but you can tell when he calls, she answers and he's like, "Hi, it's Scott." And then throughout the call, he mentions, she says, "Yeah, I didn't recognize the number." And so he's calling now from different numbers, right? He said something about his cell phone. He used over 8,000 minutes or something on his cell phone, and he had to get a new one, and now he's got a different one. And so I think this is where he's starting to accumulate cell phones because he needs to call from different numbers because he's obviously sure that they're wiretapping him. On February 15th, which is, they don't speak on Valentine's Day, but on February 15th at 2:42 a.m. Modesto time, Amber calls Scott. And this is a 2-page transcript. She's woken him up. She just wanted to check in, see how he was doing, wanted to just say hi. It was, it's just very casual banter. There's no conversation about this lie, that lie, this or that. She just says, "I'm just calling and see how you're doing." On February 19th at 7:36 a.m., they're speaking. This transcript is 3 pages long. And at some point during this call, she says, over the last 50 days, which is really how long this has been, she says, there's been a lot of drama. And when I read over the last 50 days, I thought, is that all it's fucking been, is 50 days? This is 2 lifetimes worth of drama and tragedy and lying and deception. And to think it's only been 50 days, not even 2 months, that is frightening. She says, I don't think we should talk anymore until all of this is resolved. And he says, "You're right." And this is the very last phone call that ever happens between Scott Peterson and Amber Frey. Couple of tidbits, and this is mostly from her testimony in court. Amber testified. She was asked repeatedly on the stand if Scott ever said that he loved her. And she, after some round and round, she finally says no. So he never said, "I love you" to Amber. Scott never saw Amber after Lacey's disappearance. So the last time Amber and Scott were in a room together or had any plans together physically in the same space was December 14th, which was 10 full days before Lacey went missing. The last time he was around Amber was December 14th, and they did not see each other. They would not physically be in the same room with each other until August 10th of 2004. More than 2 years later, when she walked into court to testify against him in his murder trial. Although I said in the first video, there was right around 300 calls that Amber recorded of her and Scott, and they were largely kind of her calling him. There were a ton of missed calls, unanswered calls, it just went to voicemail, but nobody left a voicemail. So there's a lot of nothingness in there, right? It's a lot of calling back and forth. And it says that on the phone bill. Back then, your cell phone bill listed every single connection you made because you got charged. I know this is hard for people to believe if you don't remember back then, but you kind of got charged for every single minute you're on the call. So every single time a call went out, they had to document what they were charging you for, right? And it was like a half a cent for every time you called or whatever. So that's all documented. And a lot of it is just missed and nothing. There were a total of, I believe, 6 calls, recordings that were played in court. The jury was given transcripts for about another dozen or so calls that were deemed to be meaningful. Now, these are just the calls that were recorded between Amber and Scott. It is said that there were more than 3,000 calls that were picked up on wiretaps. So the police were monitoring Scott's phone from very early on, and they got a lot of calls from that, right? So him calling other people, a lot of people calling him. In the early days, everybody thought Lacey was just missing. So there was a ton of well wishes, people calling in. There was search organization. There was a lot of stuff happening. So the police had gotten a warrant to wiretap him. Now, there was a point where, and this came up in the court transcripts, again, I'm reading from the court documents. There was a point where those wiretaps were almost thrown out because one of the officers, when he put together the reasoning, like the affidavit to the judge to get the search warrant, there were falsehoods in that affidavit that he submitted. I don't even know if it's called an affidavit. Whatever the paperwork is that you submit to get a search warrant, there was some not full truths in there. And at one point, it looked like Garagos might get those wiretaps thrown out. That did not happen. The judge allowed them to stay in, but there was special instruction to the jury that said that they were supposed to disregard this certain piece of claim, this claim by this officer. That was a lot. 4 whole videos talking about nothing but phone conversations. So thank you for sticking around. There is more to come. I still have to talk about jury selection. People are still asking about the robbery and all the neighbor eyewitness accounts and those kinds of things. So there's still so much more of this case to cover. Hope you stick around.